to the Xtreme Movie Show. I'm your host, Rob Rob Bond, whatever, along with Pixel, Professor Pixel. And yes, it's Father's Day 2021. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there, to everybody listening, and of course to all the James Bond fans out there, which I am a big James Bond mark. To Eric Breen and all the super fans we have here at the Xtreme Movie Show, I'd like to sit there and say, yes, this is something I actually do like and enjoy, which we're going to be discussing, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to James Bond, starting off with his very first film, Dr. No from 1962. So this was a last-minute decision that we literally just came up with. It's something that we're going to experiment with and see what our feedback is, because who doesn't love the James Bond movie? And the answer would be me for the more recent ones, but Pixel, I wanted to start off here as we get ready to dive into Dr. No. My background with James Bond, and then I want to hear yours. I grew up watching television and films back in the day when we only had 2 or 3 channels, black and white TV set, and only one of them because 2 meant you were rich. And my parents made sure that we could only watch certain things at certain times. It wasn't as easy to go out and see stuff. And then once VCRs became a thing, it was neat to be able to go and have the opportunity to see things. Much different environment than what you grew in, because you're the millennial, I'm the 80s child, so I always like to joke and say that that's a different perspective. But for you, as a Bond fan, you have not seen all the Bond films. You're not that intimately familiar with them. And even though I love them and I will always watch them, they were always on TV on ABC back in the day. I wanted to say, how did you get hooked into James Bond?
Well, it really wasn't until after I saw the last movie, I told myself that I really want to watch the older ones. They've been, well, starting with Dr. No, which we're going to be talking about tonight. I really wanted to go back and watch them. And I have watched some of them now, which is one of the reasons why we're talking about it tonight, because I did enjoy them. I enjoy them infinitely more than anything within the past 10 years, which I believe there's only been 2.
Yeah.
And when I first saw Skyfall or Spectre, I watched, took it in, and didn't really care. And I had no reason to care. It's like showing up late for the party. Oh yeah, everything's winding down now. But going back, you get to see it in its heyday. You know, if you were here 10 minutes ago, here's what would have happened. It really is something special. And you don't understand that until you actually go back and watch it. And in fact, I rewatched some of it yesterday to get ready for this stream. And I am glad I did. Every time that I watch it, it just starts this kind of fire.
Yeah, I think you bring up a couple of interesting points too, commenting between our age difference and a lot of fans out there. There's a generation of your age, the millennials, let's say, that are more familiar with the Daniel Craig Bonds, let's say, and maybe some of the older ones a little bit. And there's people like me that remember most of them because they would be played on TV all the time, or certain ones were played a lot. And for me growing up, even though I saw several on TV when I was a kid, I remember seeing parts of The Man with the Golden Gun before I even really knew what the hell James Bond was or is. I just remember the Golden Gun, and it was the scary guy that played Dracula, which of course I'm talking about Christopher Lee. So to me, it was neat to have something before Star Wars everyone geeked out on, to really kind of talk about and see how things changed over the years, different actors playing it. And of course, Bond would grow into something that it's become now, which is, unwatchable, unmanageable, trying to appeal to the lowest common denominator to all people and all things. And that's why it fails. And we won't be discussing that for quite some time, because here, starting off with film number 1, Dr. No, the obvious thing to say about films is that it's based off a lot of the books, and the books, not necessarily in order, and parts of one book and this book come together and make this movie Dr. No. You had a relatively obscure unknown who'd been maybe in a few things too, I think Marnie and a few others, and Sean Connery, that everybody loves and says is the best James Bond. We're not going to argue necessarily those things at this point, but he was a bodybuilder at one point, a very striking physical presence, too, tall, lean, good-looking gentleman. He was always described as a guy that had this animal-like magnetism too, definitely an alpha using today's terms, and it shows here in his film. And people that have not watched older films may have missed out on a lot of the obvious sexual overtones between some of the language, and of course what we've come to know about Bond women. And those things have changed because, let's be honest, this movie, 2021 is the year here. So we're talking almost 60 years ago, 55, 60 years ago when this came out. Things were different. They actually smoked back then. People actually wore suits a lot everywhere. People weren't fat typically back then. It's just interesting to rewatch a film, even if you know the film, because again, when you rewatch it, and that's one good thing about Bond films, is they have a rewatchability factor to them. You can pay attention or find yourself looking at different parts of the film. So let's just start off by talking about the opening sequence here with James Bond. Of course, we get the James Bond theme, but we don't quite really get what we come to expect from a James Bond film with this huge bombastic entrance with, dancing ladies oftentimes moving around in various stages of undress and whatnot too. It's a little understated and looks very dated for the time, and that's okay. It works for what it is. But for me, with Dr. No, didn't really know nothing about it until we dive in. So let's just go ahead and talk about once we get rolling after the opening credits. We start off by talking about how we're going to see a lot of things that we know, but going back to the very beginning without knowing anything, you've got Three Blind Mice, which is a kid kind of everybody knows, or at least used to know, singing a song that's got three guys, and it's kind of neat. I'm like, okay, where's this going? But there's this nice scene here too that, from my understanding, this was shot in Jamaica, a lot of it, Kingston to be particular. Very poor country, still is today. I know people that go down there all the time for business functions and whatnot too. They tell me that you definitely don't want to go out after night in the bad parts of town. And that's what I was saying. Even though James Bond is like a male fantasy, it still is interesting because it's one of those films that, as a franchise, you don't know where it's going to take you around the world. So here we are 60 years ago, going to some place that nobody would go to, definitely not a first world country, in Jamaica. You got these guys walking around town. They're going to this private club where some, older gentlemen sitting around in suits are playing and all that. One of them goes to leave. We don't know what. He walks by. He tips the Three Blind Mice gentleman, as you were, the natives, let's just sit there and say. And then this is cool. They pull out a gun and they pop his ass. And then they go to the building where the guy's working, and his secretary, who's working on doing something behind the books, they're giving some sort of message checking, so it's obviously a government thing. They whack her too. So right off the bat, we're like, hey, these dudes are up to no good. What's going on here? We don't know. But before, of course, we would see this huge, sometimes unrelated opening scene, which Bond would grow into. I still thought this was a pretty good opening scene because the guys break into the place and they steal these files that are titled Crab Key and Dr. No. And this is all before we even cut to Big Ben and the chimes of London and whatnot too. So what was your take on this opening scene?
Well, I'm going to answer your question, of course. But I first have to address the opening. Yeah, you're right. It's not exactly what we come to expect of Bond openings down the line. But I do enjoy the transition because while it's starting with a bunch of women dancing, it goes into the Three Blind Mice that we talk about. And then it slowly transitions into real life. And it's, for the time, I understand it's nothing groundbreaking today. It's still a nice way to start it out. And you don't get a lot of movies nowadays with openings, but James Bond is one of the few that sticks with it. It is truly what we expect in every Bond film now. And if it doesn't have one, well, I don't think people are happy. As for the opening scene itself, yeah, I absolutely agree. The three blind mice come up and you don't suspect them. And then once they do what they do, it's also a good way to, I feel, introduce the title because they pull out the file, Dr. No. And even though it already said Ian Fleming's Dr. No, which you can see in the thumbnail, which I really should have put the file there instead. I might have to do that later on. I feel like that's a good way of introducing the title of our movie here.
Yeah, it works. I mean, it's reminding you this is about Dr. No. So we get to where we cut over across the seas of Britain, and I'm often reminded how slow, or really the speed of information flowing is extremely vital to the success of people in wartime, from World War I, World War II to Korea, whatever. politics aside, the speed of information back then was a lot slower than it is today. So phone calls and going across the world and all that's kind of a big deal. And so some of these things that spies would do back then that we may talk about in this episode, we may not be used to in today's world, because you get a phone call coming in because strange ways the guy that was assassinated didn't check in. You get this nice little obvious call center, if you will, for whatever he's related to. And again, we know everybody who's watched this knows what's going on and knows what happens and gets it, but explaining it from the very beginning point of view of something, we're trying to look at it from that perspective. It's neat because we go, okay, this is a big deal. It's going to somebody important, but not so important that we can't take a moment to cut away. And we go to Le Cercle, which is the ambassador's lounge or whatever in London, where we get a lot of, I'm not going to say beautiful people, but well-dressed British individuals, not really stuff you like or whatever, where the guy's looking for James Bond, just give him my card, will you? And this is, of course, one of the opening scenes that everyone goes back to, especially with the passing recently of Sean Connery, of the Bond opening when he first says Bond, James Bond. We get a beautiful woman sitting at a table full of men playing. I don't recall if this is background or not, but I always like when they have the shoe and then they have the thing that moves the cards to it and all that. Whatever, it looks good. And again, this is 60 years ago, but they're all dressed up. Everybody's smoking. This just is, you can't get more gentlemanly and high end than this. Everyone's got the proper length, cuff length. Everything's matching up. Nothing outlandish. This is high society. And then, of course, we get to where the lady's like running through some bad luck. She's gorgeous. She's beautiful. And then, of course, cuts over to Sean Connery, where she's like, what your name is? And he's like, Bond, James Bond. And then, you get the music going. And it's like, okay, immediately the movie works, whether or not the writing's there, the photography, because Sean Connery himself has to be believable in this role. I've often talked about with RDV, one of our other guest hosts too, when we cover action films, about while we may love action, we want people to be physically believable in the role that they're playing. If Sean Connery were 5'6", 150 pounds, like the majority of people in Hollywood these days, this would not work. So him being 6'1", 6'2", athletic, lean, he's just looking as handsome and dapper as could be. He looks like a man, a gentleman. He doesn't look like a wuss. He looks like he can take a punch and give one too. So great, iconic opening scene, smoke-filled room, lots of money flowing around. Of course, James Bond is winning, and he seductively, very charmingly has this woman basically say, I'm going to sleep with you tonight. It's like, okay, here's when you'll do it. I mean, it's everything that you want without being so overt. It's just done well, and it's very believable. And that's the male fantasy part that we talk about. I want to be this guy here. And within a moment of him talking and the way he handles himself and being professional yet polite and not being a pushover, you get that vibe immediately from Sean Connery in this opening gambling scene here. And again, if this doesn't work, you may not have a franchise. So I'm putting a lot of emphasis on this opening scene because it's so iconic. What's your take?
No, I absolutely agree. When I was, like I said, rewatching it yesterday, you get instantly that feeling. They don't even show his face for a good 4 minutes, but you can feel the swagger this man has. And Eunice Gayson, who plays Sylvia Trench, she's beautiful.
Yes.
There's
very ladylike.
Yes. And their chemistry is great, even though it only lasts for a few moments. But it really is. And of course, I don't want to say sadly, because obviously we need to get the mission. Sadly, though, he has to go from this beautiful woman that he's interacting with to going to get informed by M that he has to travel to Jamaica. And this is, I'm going to be honest, this is one of the slower parts, because it's just, let's get the information out of the way. Here's why you're going, when you're going, and get there. And he has to leave almost immediately.
Yeah, with Moneypenny, I mean, he and her, that was always a thing. They got really good chemistry here too. Without it being, hey, throw me over their desk and bone me, till I'm raw. It's done in the classiest way as possible, and it's late at night, of course. The thing I want to say about M, because obviously in later films we'll see a lot more of him too, but of course he's his boss. This actor, one thing I don't know that ever gets mentioned, and I'm not too familiar with him outside of James Bond, but I just know he was the teacher in school that would never smile, that was kind of strict, that you thought was very difficult, hard, but you kind of didn't screw around in his classroom for the most part because you felt like he could crush you, however that would be. He's What I'm saying is, there in a scene here with Bond where they switch out his gun from a Beretta to the Walter PPK, Bond recognizes the status of where he's at, because Bond was a commander, and we don't necessarily hear all this stuff right now, but he was high up in the military food chain. But Emma's head shoulders above him. He's at the elite levels of government. Bond basically sits down. He doesn't even look up from his paper. He's like, Bond, leave the gun, because Bond tries to take his old gun when he leaves, and Bond just does it like shit. He's got eyes in the back of his head. If he doesn't have that kind of weight to his role, the way he delivers and performs, then Bond looks like he's running the show, and he's not. Bond is not a superior in here. He is an agent on a mission to perform an assignment. Go find out what happened to Strangeways, immediately find out what's going on. That's it. And I got to say this too about this movie. You're right. It kind of seems the pacing in some places, it seems a little slow. There's several scenes in this film where there's music that they start that seems like it's just a filler, and it's not a bad thing. But this is a film that, sadly, for the most part, I wish more of the James Bond films and franchise were more like this, in the sense that they were just a simple mission, not some grand psycho trying to go to outer space and all this other crap that things would devolve into, or something so convoluted you don't get a rat's ass. This is Cold War. We got to find out what the hell's going on. You're on the next flight to Jamaica in a couple hours, so get there and get going. So he goes back to his sweet man cave, crib, whatever you want to call it. It's not a man cave because he owns it. And a man cave, don't even get me started on that. That triggers me, okay? He goes back to his pad, very classy, and that, and he notices somebody broke in. So he goes into his study that's, of course, got lots of, rich mahogany and volumes of leather-bound books and everything, too. And, of course, he's still dressed up in his nice suit, and he takes his new gun out. We get a beautiful shot of the lady's legs with her putting into a hat, because, of course, she's like, I'm not going to wait. I just want a bone right now. And Bond slips her, some vitamin B12, I guess, an injection, let's say, because we don't see it. But how can you resist James Bond? So we know he's dapper. We know he's the man. We want to be this guy, and we're only 15 minutes into the film. I mean, it's phenomenal. Then you get, I don't even know if Pan Am's still in existence, but you get him flying to Jamaica. Yeah, it's Pan Am, right? Pan American.
I believe so, but it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed a lot of these older films. I'm like, I think I remember I flew on them when I was younger, this one or that one, but now they're not around because of consolidation and all that too. International travel was definitely different now than when I was back then. What's interesting about this next scene too is it's during the morning when he arrives in Jamaica, and it's not a huge airport, but there's a scene of this guy in a suit watching him, which Hawaii Five-0 fans will know this is Jack Lord. And of course, it's going to be Felix Leiter, the American counterpart that eventually he's supposed to meet up with. And when you look, you know that this was shot, and there's a lot of people in there, but you look, most of the islanders and native people they're wearing dresses and everything else there too. It's like, wow, totally different than what you would see today. You automatically feel almost how small the island is because how small the airport is. And again, he goes to leave, and some ladies are like, oh, excuse us, we were waiting in line. He's like, oh, I'm sorry. And he opens the door, lets the ladies in, goes to get a taxi. And the gentleman says, Mr. Bond, your car's arrived. I'll take you. And he says, okay, just a moment, get my luggage. So he's in charge of the situation. But you can already tell he knows something's on the up and up. He's got a beautiful suit on, wonderful blue tie, light blue shirt, charcoal gray suit, dresses very, very well. And he makes a phone call to the place that's supposed to receive him. They're like, no, Mr. Bond, we know you're coming, but we did not send a car. And so we're like, damn it, not only is Bond the ladies' man and can play cards really well, and he gets to probably shoot people, now he's smart. You're like, damn it, he's got the total package. You can't be jealous of this guy. Sean Connery's nailing it, like I said. So I kind of like the scene where the driver takes him, and immediately you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere in Jamaica because you're driving down a road that's got old power poles to it, and you're really close to the water and a bunch of scrub, and it's a crappy looking road that is just, something you and I would be used to seeing here in Central Florida, because we see some of that in some of the outskirts of town, just west of Orlando, Florida, in the Pine Hills Palace, as it were. And Bond tells him, hey, turn over to the right. Car goes by, puts the gun to the guy's head. The guy's sweating. Bond does a really bad judo throw, because that's what calls for action in early James Bond films. But the guy takes a cyanide pill that he has hidden in the cigarette case, and Bond gets no info. So it's kind of, by Bond standards today, not a lot of action. But I love it because it feels like it's a spy caper up to now. So how are you feeling up to this point?
I have to agree. And when he bites into that cyanide cigarette, I just small spy things like that. You don't get a lot of that in the newer films.
No.
Just starting off, it's just small little things that come along the way, which when he actually gets to his place, we'll see some more of his tools of the trade, per se. But you're absolutely right about the action comes like really quick. And we dealt with the death of the one agent, okay? We don't really care. We're here for James Bond. James Bond is thrown into the action right after we saw him with, obviously, the woman that we enjoyed his chemistry with. And it has, you're right, some pacing issues, but it's not here in the beginning, that's for sure.
Yeah, so to me, we get to the detective spy part of it here because he meets the gentleman at the place that he's staying at the embassy, and he says, okay, I want to check out on Strangway's place. So he goes up there and doesn't really find much. Sees a photo of him with an islander going fishing, and he sees a receipt for something for a professor that happened to be one of the gentlemen there. He goes to gets his hotel room, and one thing that Bond films would do sometimes is they would always do the high society thing, and they'd give you a little bit of moment's notice about clothes and just being in elegant places that the average person like you and I almost would never see in our lifetime. That's not our lifestyle, but here Bond, knows all these high-end kind of things too. But again, more spy stuff. He puts the talcum powder on his briefcase dials. He puts the hair over his door because he wonders if people are going to come after him, but he doesn't. He meets some people, gets some information. One of the guys we should recognize is the embassy head, and the other two gentlemen are the people that were playing cards earlier at the beginning scene with the three blind mice. And so he's talking, and the interesting thing about conversations too, without the yelling back and forth that Bond stuff can be, here he's just asking questions and shutting up and letting people answer. And from there, I consider it kind of like very tight writing where he's listening and he's watching people. Because by the way the one guy looks at him, you can kind of almost go, maybe somebody's not in the up and up, because he thinks, he wants to meet everybody that was close to him before. He then goes to see, how do you say his name? Praro or whatever. Say it again. Quarrel, who was the fisherman in the photograph too. And again, this is a neat scene because it's not an expensive looking place. It looks like it's a third world crap hole where he's walking to or taking a taxi, and he meets him, and Quarrel kind of blows him off. And he gets set up by Quarrel because it turns out Quarrel's working with the gentleman that we know as Felix Leiter in there too. He proves himself, and they shake hands. And so we're like, hey, this is cool. They're all in a team together working here. There's no, my bond is bigger than your bond ego kind of things here. Okay, this is the mission. This is what's going on. And, if you're a friend of Red Stripe, Jamaican beer, Bond destroyed a whole bunch of it here as he took these guys out. But by 60s action standards, it's pretty standard fare. By today's standards, it doesn't matter, but it doesn't have to be a lot. It's about the mission, because then later at night, this lady that had been taking photos of him appears at place, and they write her up and they realize somebody sent her. They don't know from what. So a lot of this is spy stuff that would happen quicker today due to technology, but seems like it's a bunch of scenes, but they do happen sort of quick here before there's a break in the action. Anything pop out to you during these scenes?
I just want to take a moment to appreciate Quarrel. Really. He's obviously going to be in scenes a little later, but I feel like he is a good side character. He holds his own weight at the same time, but he's not the star of the show by any means.
Definitely not a photogenic individual. I mean, he seems like he's an islander, or perhaps, depending on whatever his film background is probably related to a particular area or culture. Or sometimes when you're shooting international, you can be active in one area and be a total unknown in another.
Yeah. But going from there, I think one of the scenes I really do enjoy is when they go to follow Puss Feller to his restaurant.
Mm-hmm.
And we see who else but the photographer from earlier, who was snapping a picture of him from the airport. Quarrel quickly gets her, and she's obviously not happy about it. But when she gets a moment, she takes this, it looked kind of like a stone. She snaps it against the side of the chair and then scratches Quarrel's face. And to that, Quarrel just feels the blood, and then this grins at her, and she still could hold her own, while Bond rips out the film, though. She ultimately does not get what she was hoping for.
There's no violence like Caribbean violence. All right, so why don't you take us through the next scene when he goes to see Professor Dent?
When he visits Dent at his office, and he's inquiring about the receipt. Sorry, I'm trying to filter my mind through it right now.
Well, the three blind mice were trying to put a hit on him, but they weren't successful. They just car passed by or whatever, and then he's going in and he meets the secretary before he goes and sees Dent. That's where I'm at.
Yes, the lovely secretary. I forgot about what's her name? Zena Marshall, I believe, the actress, playing the character.
The Dent secretary.
That's not her name, though.
Well, I know that, but that's her function.
Taro's her name.
That's right. But we don't know that yet.
That's true.
We will later.
Mr. Bond gets to know a little later as well. But he's inquiring about the rocks. They weren't special, so he threw them out. And Dent also claimed that the rocks were not from Crab Key, privately owned island from Kingston, near Kingston. I apologize. And from there, Bond leaves Dent and rushes off to a boat. And he argues with the driver for a moment to take him to Crab Key, the island in question.
Yeah, you mentioned before about pacing, and there's a few parts in here where it really seems to slow down a lot. I don't hate it, actually, and a part of me, I kind of like it because it's not busy. There's not tons of explosions or stupid stuff, or like in the past 20 years of Bond films, a lot of them where there's just millions of people on some gigantic city somewhere on the globe. That has its place, but here, I like the feeling of going from London to Kingston to the embassy, which isn't really huge, but it's big enough. But it's probably the center for the whole Caribbean at that time. And here he is just dealing with a couple of people. It feels very small and intimate too, because, obviously the receipt that strangers had before he got assassinated, Dent's looking at blowing Bond off. And so we're like, yeah, he's not on the up and up. You can just kind of feel it too, because he won't make eye contact with Bond. I'm talking about the nonverbal stuff that we mentioned before about Bond, that you go, yeah, this guy's acting shifty. He just feels it too. So Bond's walking out and he's like, well, I'll take that. And he takes the receipt back and walks out too, before, like you say, meeting up a little bit later with somebody. Were you going to say something?
Well, no, go ahead and finish your point, because I was going to go into the next scene, because I actually do really, this is one of the scenes that do stick out to me.
Oh, yeah, go ahead with it then. Yeah, because, we're talking about where Dent's leaving.
Dent leaves, gets on a boat, and he's taken to the island, Crab Key in question. And on the island, he's escorted to this large room, and he's sitting in this one chair and there's a table nearby, but he is all alone. The only thing that we hear is somebody over the intercom. And he's clearly not pleased. And it's very angry with him that he arrived, one, during the daytime, two, that the mission to kill Bond thus far has failed. And he doesn't like failure. And he's telling Dent he'll hold him responsible if Bond comes around the island, and tells him to deal with it. And to help deal with it, he has a gift on the table, which is a tarantula.
This is good. I love this. It's a great scene because it's just him in this empty room, but the set piece itself is just gorgeous to me without looking expensive, because it's a heavily armed facility right there on the water's edge. So obviously they're mining, doing something there. And it almost looks like he's underneath. It looks like a giant sewer grate with the sky peering in on him. It's just a wonderful scene that always sticks out. And whoever's talking to him, Dr. No, we presume, is, he sounds like he's on drugs, because he's just so emotional. It's like, okay, whatever. At least he's not a screaming madman. I mean, he's just displeased, and you're going to go take care of it. But yeah, you're right. When he picks up the tarantula, you're like, okay, that's great. It's not like a bomb or like 20 ninjas or anything like that. It's like, okay, the 3 blind mice have failed. Everybody else has failed. So here's a tarantula. It's like, I don't get it, but I like it. It's pretty cool.
So one thing I want to say about it is it's almost worse that he is so calm in his way of saying, I'm not pleased with what you've done, because he's almost chilling that way. And honestly, the next scene is just as good. And again, it's only one person in the room. That's Bond. He returns to his hotel room and discovers his hair on the door. It's been, it's already off. And the briefcase has been messed with. He looks around, though, sees nothing, and so he goes to bed. But in the middle of the night, he's sleeping. But then he wakes up, because what is that? Oh, it's the spider climbing on him. And he's trying to stay still because he doesn't want to alert it. And I mean, I guess some people could see this scene as almost comedic because it's one spider. I do have to point out, though, I've learned recently that, did you know that tarantulas, if they drop from a short distance, they will die?
I did not know that, sir. Yeah, I am not the tarantula expert.
So basically, I learned this because we had a specialist come in at one of the places I work, and they had animals, and one of them was a tarantula. If a tarantula drops from even 3 feet, it will crack like an egg and die. So that, obviously, most people don't know that. And so it's absolutely believable that he'd have to get up and hit it like 15 times. But in reality, just throwing it off, it's done.
Well, this is one of my favorite scenes in a movie, because when he's coming back home in the evening after this long day of doing detective work, it's awesome because not only has he been productive when he's walking in, they're playing the James Bond music as he's walking in to get like to see if he's got any notes or whatever, and the chick's looking at him just like, hey, he's a handsome guy, but the music's playing. It's so out of place. I just think it's phenomenal. But you're right, when he goes in here, I like it because a tarantula makes sense. It looks like it's a natural death. If it was a false flag operation or something that the type of term we would use today about things, it would be something else or whatever. But here it works because it's native to where they're at. And Bond is sweating his ass off too in here. I've never seen Sean Connery sweat or have it sprayed on him so much too. So it's an effective scene. It works for me. It's a less is more sort of approach. It creeps me out a little bit, which goes with, hey, we haven't seen this person who Dr. No is. And like you say, he's understated the way he talks and delivers. So it adds to his, alleged menace.
I do have to point out, though, that while for us guys, there's a lot of lovely Bond women, Bond is there for the ladies. Just him laying there, I bet you that plenty of women were most happy with that scene, even with the big spider climbing all over him.
Oh, yeah. So it transitions from there where he goes to meet one of the other guys there to talk about Dr. No, and we're getting some more background about, and I love peeling back the layers of a story here. Well, he runs like a concentration camp. He's this guy, keeps himself, and it's quiet. So we're not getting the big thing here at once. It develops at its own pace, but we get We get Dent's secretary, coming back into showing us her legs because, obviously she's going to be somebody Bond is going to bone. Would that be babe number 2? Well, we'll keep
Number
a count
2.
later.
Number 2.
Yeah, so he leaves and he has a package, but just the way she's talking, his Bond sense is going off, and he looks at the door, and he opens it, and he basically strong arms her, calls her bluff about, listening at the door, saying, well, I'm free this afternoon as well. I'd like you to show me the island. And he's suggesting it, but he's really commanding it. He's not going, hey, do you want to go out with me maybe sometime? I don't know. I thought it would be good. It's like, no, I'd like you to show me the island.
So
3 o'clock my place.
So you're saying he's not a deputy dumbass?
He is no Andy from Twin Peaks, no. So we don't know that she's not on the up and up, but we know she's not because she's listening. She's a spy. And I don't know if she's supposed to, she doesn't sound Chinese, but her haircut, even though her hair's up, reminds me of that too. And I just don't know if that's significant or not because of the Cold War and communism and all that stuff too. But the next scene is where things, I think, actually go up a level because we get Bond with Quarrel at the boat. Quarrel's not wanting to go to Crab Key, but Bond's basically having him say stuff. But he's got what we call back in the old days a Geiger counter. These were big, luggy, expensive things back then that, probably more prevalent today. But back then in the early 60s, did we even have a man on the moon by this point? 62? So all this stuff was relatively fresh. This is when, in America, the most amount of money ever is being poured into the sciences from the government. It's never been replicated ever again. This is when we consider having the most advancement in technology, allegedly, because of this. So it's neat that Bond's using the appropriate tool for what's going on here. And really, has he fired his gun yet? No. So even though he's been followed, people have tried to kill him, whatever, it's still a spy thing. And what's also neat here too is you get Leiter coming up and they're all talking and they're all there in their dress shirts and their ties, even though they loosened their ties, and they're out there in that Kingston, Jamaican sun, which you and I know from being in Central Florida. Even if this was January, it could be 80, 85 degrees and humid. And it's definitely, partly sunny and all that. So it's nice just for them looking. It looks like you're right there on just some nondescript beach with a few average boats behind them. They're not in the south of France with, $1 million yachts or anything too. So again, the feeling of being there in Jamaica with somebody that looks like he's from Jamaican Coral really, really works. But ultimately the decision is made that that's where they're going to go to. A little later this evening is the plan before Bond ends up going back home to his crib and getting ready to go out on his date. And you're right. There are slow passages, because you would expect action or something after this, but it's nothing more than him getting a phone message from Dent's secretary, who's in a very lovely nightgown getting ready for her hot date. And I just like this transition scene because she's laying on the phone kind of seductively, but it's not overtly sexual in a way. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It's done tastefully or whatever. She's laying there like, a woman on the phone, back the old school phones, tell him where to go, driving. And they do like the slow transition of him driving the car because, of course, somebody's trying to follow him and trying to put the hit out on them. And he manages to elude that in a really piss poor car chase where the car falls off and explodes. And he has a dumb one-liner about like, well, I guess they're on their way to the funeral because the construction guys like, how'd that happen? But then he walks up to a very beautiful old kind of house and she's surprised to see him, and he just about strangles her and bones her. I mean, this guy's good. He's really good.
So about the car chase, yes, it is very
it's 60s style.
Yeah, when he's turning the wheel like that and the car's not moving at all, really. It's the positioning is all off of how he's turning. It's a little silly, but you have to remember the time, what they could do, and for the most part, it's still, you get what it's supposed to be, and that is what is important. And you're absolutely right. When he gets there, and she's just getting out of the shower, she's absolutely surprised to see him, and she goes and she has a call. And as soon as he's done in the living room, he opens the door and she quickly changes her tone from "I'm delivering information" to "Okay, see you next time." And
lying woman.
Then he comes and he steals her away. Quickly, though, it transitions to Bond and just laying in bed while she's fixing her makeup. And he's trying to say, "Oh, I want to go out tonight." and is trying to get him to stay. No, let's just stay here. No, we don't need to go out. Oh, I can cook. I don't want you getting dishpan hands. Such an old term.
Yeah.
But eventually she can't fight him anymore. She gets dressed, and he calls for a taxi. And when it arrives, it's actually arresting her.
Yeah, and this scene is good too, because obviously it's alluded to that they had sweet relations or whatever, and after a serious case of bedhead, while he's laying in there, making sure he's not in the wet spot or whatever, she's trying to keep him there, and she's guilty, and she's trying to get him killed. And all I could think of is Bond's going, man, damn it, this one's trying to kill me. I'm going to sex her up and kind of force her into it. So it's kind of a little, some people would say, misogynistic or rapey. I don't know if I like using those words, but he's definitely very assertive with her, and she yields. And damn, he's a good looking guy, because the other thing too is when she's like, why do you need a taxi? And, he just grabs her and he does her again. So it's like, not only does he basically, make love to her once, he's going for a round two. And then as soon as they're done, they're walking out, she's got this beautiful, looks like a Chinese dress on or whatever. And it's in the evening. And you're right. She gets so pissed at him when she gets in the cart and realizes she's being arrested. And he's like, F you, is his thought, like, okay, I'm done with you. She spits in his face. I'm like, damn it. But it's cool because he goes back to her place and he sets it up, and you're like, okay, what's he doing? And he's turning the lights off, and he's pouring himself some drinks. And he sets the bed up in the old body pillow thing, which this is the first time I ever saw this when I was a kid. I'm like, what's he doing? I don't get it. Because a little later evening, when the other car arrives, it's dark. He is playing cards. We see a gun come through the door, put a few shots into the pillow, and he turns around, and it's the professor, lo and behold, who was, as Felix Leiter said, which I thought was a very good line, well, either he's a bad professor or he's a good liar, because, he should have known that the rocks were magnetic. Bond to put him in a verbal trap. Bond basically isn't able to get any information out of him, and then has to shoot him, and then puts a second on him to make sure the job is done.
Well, that's actually the scene my profile picture right now is from.
Yeah.
He's holding the gun, looking at him, and unable to get anything, and so
yeah,
he shoots him. And this is actually the first time he's shot his gun throughout the movie, I believe.
Yeah, like I say, there's parts where, like, right now I'm feeling like we're almost through with the film, in that it just seems like a lot of stuff has happened. We're not. We're about halfway through, and there's a lot more to it, but it does happen pretty fast and quick. I'm seeing that a couple people have joined us. Johnny, who says he has not seen this in only one movie. Johnny, I think it's on Tubi now, according to Pixel. I believe, being in the United States, it might be there. When are you going to do Back in Action? Eric, I don't know what the hell that means, but if you heard me earlier on this, if you just tuned in, I said, it's Father's Day. What better way to start off with Bond? But typically we like to think about doing Commando over the summer. So be on the alert for that. And also, going back to James Bond, let's be on the alert. The fact that he wants to get the crab key. It's dark. He's meeting with Leiter. I like, even though it's probably just a filter they put on during the day, I like how this looks like it's at night. They take a small boat out with a manual boat with them to get the key, and Quarles just doesn't like it. There's tails of a dragon on this boat, and you and I, being from Florida, we're used to seeing the open water and the way the sky looks and stuff, and this just kind of reminds me of it. There's definitely something seductive and charming about it. And again, you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere here, because you don't see big freighter boats in the background. You don't hear or see a lot of stuff. It's just these guys doing something, and you feel isolated, which I think is a strong suit. They get the crab key, they row up on an island, Quarrel and Bond. They hide their boat, and you get a sense, again, this is a spy mission. It's not an assassination. It's not an otherworldly thing going on. But this is one of my favorite parts of the film, because they're not necessarily undercover, but they're sleuthing. They're in enemy territory. The radar's got to be up. They can't screw around. They're in go mode. And Bond's by himself, and he's got a native that's just helping out with the CIA. It's not like he's got an agent or anything, and there's no waka waka for laughs or anything. They get some rest. When they wake up in the morning, there's a female voice singing. Bond wakes up, and we get that really iconic scene of Honey Ryder walking out with the shell singing to herself here too. And of course, it is a dubbed voice. And of course, I'm talking about Ursula Andress. So what's your take on this little scene here as we get to Ursula?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a little unexpected, but we're quickly intrigued. This is the third truly Bond girl of the film. I suppose we could say, though it comes later, she's the main one. But it's absolutely intriguing, and this is where we are picking things up. I mean, we're going to reach kind of a slump, but really does. I just saw Eric Breen's comment. But yeah, no, absolutely intrigued when meeting her, and she's saying how she's going to get $50 for the shells. But quickly, he says that people are coming, and they'll be after her today. So whenever he tries to warn her to go back, and her boat ends up getting, well, shall we say, ruined, she has no choice but to tag along.
There's really no point for her to be here other than to look good and be a part of it. I have zero issues with that, and some people would say that's extraneous. And, sometimes I don't care. A lot of times I do, but in here, like I talk about, Bond's dressed really well. She looks really good. I don't know if the discussion was, hey, we've got to fit a hot woman in here that tags along with him because he's the hero, so he can save her and then, make love to her at the end, whatever.
I have never read Dr. No, so I don't know exactly what happens in the novel.
Right.
But I believe she is in it, and I believe her full name in that is Honey Ryder.
Yeah, but Honey Ryder, I mean, come on, the cowgirls, the intern today for all the Tinder kids, but I mean, looking at her, you're like, oh, Jesus. And Bond, he gets that look on his face like, I'm not worthy, because she goes, what's your name? And he goes, James. Not quite that bad, but it's like he doesn't go Bond, James Bond. He's like, it's James, because he's taken aback, and his body count, his love count's higher than his kill count so far. So we know how this ended up. But yeah, all of a sudden, even though this whole extended section's been kind of slow and deliberate, I like it. You've got the waterfall. You do have this island here. It looks very typical by, the standards you and I are used to being here in Central Florida too. So it's not like it's this lush tropical paradise. It looks like it's a crap hole, hard place to be, because with the patrol boats going around, her boat getting shot up wherever they have to run in upstream, let's say. She's like, oh, I know a place to hide, because she goes there all the time for it. So they go up there, and we see that these guys are coming after them too. You do get the sense of urgency, like, oh, if you die out here, nobody's going to find you. That's it. There's no cell phones, there's no sat phones, there's nothing going on. So they take off in hot pursuit, and we're about 2/3 through the movie. And what I want to say here is that while they go upriver and it's hot, there's mosquitoes, there's a nice little scene here where some of the guards show up with the dogs, barely miss them. We see her getting attracted to them, at least a little bit interested, curious, or whatever. She's saying, oh, put the salt water on you, it'll help get rid of whatever. She's not throwing herself at him or whatever. She's very distrustful, but I get the vibe that she can handle herself with the knife and all that. She just seems that way. But as a kid, I always thought this is the coolest thing. It was the first time I ever saw anybody do the whole, hey, I'm going to take a bamboo reed or some reed and, open it up, and I'm going to stick my head under the water and breathe through it, because they hide behind some palm fronds there too while everybody goes away. And then Bond takes the knife and he guts the guy, and it's not bloody. It's not. You see it, you just know, you see it happen, but you don't see the entrance of the knife into the body. It's very G-rated kind of violence. And I kind of prefer that sometimes too. And here it kind of works because, she freaks out or whatever. But again, the sense of urgency, hey, they're getting close, we need to move up. And we see a sign that says, danger, don't pass this point. So things are picking up, and we really still don't know what the hell is going on with Dr. No on this island. And that's beautiful. It's a perfect example of, again, showing you what's going on in a mystery. It's a spy mission. It's not an action film. It feels like they're really getting close to whatever it is they're supposed to be. And you're really keenly interested in seeing how far away they are from civilization. And it's just the three of them, and the walls are kind of closing in. And even though this film, like I say, seems very slow at times, it does move well. And to this point, I'm really digging it, because the only other thing that happens here is they see some tracks and say, yeah, those are dragon tracks. It's like, no, that's That's Diesel. I mean, and that's what it is. And they sit down for a little bit of rest before, Honey and Bond have a conversation. So not a lot of action necessarily, but one of my favorite scenes watching it. I don't know why. It just works for me. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, no, I agree. You don't need to get overly grotesque. We're not watching it for the gore. We're watching it for just like you said. Even G action is better than it sometimes makes sure that the film keeps a low level. If you go overboard, it's turning into a horror film, and that's just this isn't what we're here for. We're here for James Bond to do his quick moves and quickly save the day. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Okay. Well, take us through this next bit of action, or whatever you want to call it.
Well, where he's wait. Remind me right where we are.
This is where they were talking. It's at night. Or it's a day, he's cleaning his gun off or whatever, and they're waiting tonight to move up. It's been almost about 12 hours, so the idea was that if Leiter didn't hear from them, he was going to send in the Marines because they'd probably be dead. And so it's about that time. So we've got, this is where they're going across the barge or whatever, and they actually see the dragon.
Ah, the dragon, yes. A tank that they call the dragon. And I do love the scene that Honey... when she's saying, how do you know that it's not really a dragon? And do you know everything about every creature there is? And when they get a moment to learn about each other earlier, where she's explaining, my schooling was this encyclopedia I had. I started at A, and I've gotten all the way to T. I probably know more than you. She's just... I don't want to say adorable, because she's this obviously a woman.
As it was said in the later Bond film, but innocent in the ways of the world.
Yeah,
not really,
innocent
though.
In the ways of the world.
Yeah.
The sad part here, when they truly see the dragon, which is why I asked for a moment to respect Quarrel. Quarrel is flamed.
It's not a good looking scene in that it feels like it just isn't done well.
Really?
I get your panicking, Quarrel, and I get your negative beliefs are probably really what got you killed when I get philosophical. You're a damn idiot, you're panicking, bro. Come on.
Yep, and he's roasted alive. And that's
He's wearing a red shirt, and I wonder if they got that from Star Trek wasn't around yet.
There you go.
Star Trek wasn't around yet. This is 62.
Yeah, that's true. That's
there
true.
You go.
So this is the first red shirt to officially die. But Honey and Bond are quickly apprehended. They're taken, and they are led into the compound. And they're going through this whole decontamination process. This does get a little... it almost feels unnecessary.
Extraneous.
Yes, we'll say that as we're
irrelevant, not particularly effective.
And eventually, they are after they're stripped and washed, they're given robes and they're put into a room, and they have a drink there. Well, they both take a sip, and Honey is the first to give in, and then Bond quickly, he's trying to get up and collect his senses, but he soon follows and passing out because the coffee was drugged.
Yeah, Bond loses a point here for me, and I'm going to tell you why, because we've seen him spend a minute or two gussing up his room with the talcum powder and the hair just to see if anybody broke in and went through his belongings and such. And he, even when he comes back home and notices all that, he goes to pour himself some vodka or whatever, some Smirnoff, I believe it is, off the tray, which had clean ice in it, by the way, which, whatever. No AC unit in there, too. So they must have just put it in there. But he smells it, And then he goes and he picks up the bottle that's unopened, opens that, and drinks that. So he knows this kind of stuff to look for. So it's, Bond, you lose a point, and it's stupid, and they just did it, I'm sure, for writing purposes, to make him pass out before the next scene. And, of course, to put them both in robes together like this couple. What are they going to do? Now they're a Bond, no pun intended. But you knew better than to drink that crap, Bond. But the other thing that I got to give a bonus for, too, is when we talk about the scene where we hear Dr. No's voice, we don't see him, where the professor's getting a talking to verbally about what's going on when he gets the spider scene.
Mm-hmm.
But here, these set pieces are friggin' fantastic. Even by 60s schlocky standards, this thing looks good. If you want to say, well, they're in Jamaica, it's a secret underground layer or mountain layer, I'm okay with that because they are there. But this is a swanky looking pad that Dr. No's going. I'm going like, your stock is rising, Doctor.
And, well, we quickly see, after they've been passed down, a man enter with these black gloves, and he shortly leaves.
It's the only homoerotic scene of the movie to this point, because he's standing there and you just see both his hands in the gloves, and Bond's passed out in the bed and he's just kind of like looking at Bond like he's tucking him in. I'm like, this is creeping me out, Dr. No. I don't get it. Why are you doing this? You hated
Doctor,
the guy.
Stop.
Yeah.
They awake in the morning and they get dressed, and actually in the thumbnail, that's another one of the scenes, you can see Honey as she's picking out her outfit.
I like these outfits. They're good.
I do too. They're very they have a very a very, I would say, a kind of classic Chinese kind of look to it.
Absolutely. Very neat and clean Asian aesthetic.
Yes. And that's what Dr. No's going for. And we actually get to meet Dr. Julius No. He arrives and quickly makes point that his black gloves aren't just black gloves. He lost his hands and he's replaced them with metallic ones. He quickly invites them to lunch, and they are discussing the origins of his wealth and what he is doing with his facility. Just this scene, I do enjoy this. I know this is one of those discussion scenes, so it can get kind of slow, but I do enjoy the presence that Dr. No has. Even when we were just hearing his voice, he still carries that very calm manner to him.
I like this scene in that the guy's got a sick crib. He's got resources. He's managed the tongs, which I'm glad that's been mentioned mainstream, because all the interesting stuff is the stuff we know on the streets rather than what Hollywood tells us. And the triads, the tongs, the crips, the bloods, all the different things are out there, all the different cultural things that do exist. It's nice to see all that. And you could argue then back here to early 60s, especially after World War II, that with communism and being a big threat around the world, and some would argue it's even a bigger one today, that especially British people, that once the progressives came in after World War II and Britain kind of rolled over, that America was about the only one that really didn't have a anti-communist kind of hero showing for him, because James Bond's British, obviously, but to me, I wonder how much they were allowed to go into directly saying Dr. No is a communist. And again, I'm not sure about the books. It's been 30 years since I read any of them or whatever, but he's talking about radioactivity, which was for the most part at that time a great unknown, and a race to see who could do it the best first and conquer this energy and all that too. And so far, it looked like with Fat Man and Little Boy not too long ago, relative to the time this film came out, that the United States should be in it. But it's nice to see that it had some scientific, political relevance for when this movie came out about 55, 60 years ago. The thing is here, Bond recognizes, and we've talked about this before, what's going on in the situation. Even though he's the prisoner, he realizes the Doctor knows, basically trying to impress upon him. So he's taking that as a sign of weakness, and he's trying to get him rattled, which, Dr. No initially does a good job of basically kind of blowing him off, and he respects Bond's professional capacity to get this far, even though he believes Bond should be dead. And the one rule of thumb is these good guys should have been killed already rather than allowed to have us as viewers see him in a film. But Bond actually gains the upper hand here verbally with him by kind of pissing him off a little bit. And so I'm not going to say Dr. No's weak, but I like the fact that we didn't really see much of him through this whole film up until the end here. I really, really do. Because the whole movie is the spy mission. It's the figuring out what the hell's going on, getting there. And we don't even really know up until this point that the Dr. No's got a history with radiation. He's personally vested in trying to harness it in the way that he sees fit. And that's to disrupt the NASA stuff going off, which is mentioned early on, which is somewhat brand new. Again, going back to the 60s. So it's not the best bad guy scene of all time. It's not horrible, and certainly by Bond standards, this is extremely tame from what we will come to know in the future.
I mean, I agree, but at the same time, after Bond asks Honey to be excused, and he does get to Dr. No. Dr. No, while keeping his calm manner, does get pissed off by Bond. To the point where he like picks up something and he crushes it with his metallic hand. And whenever he's going on and he's saying, "You've damaged my pride and my organization," and he's admitting that, but he wants Bond to join pretty much him. And of course, our hero James Bond refuses. After that,
say no.
Did it say no?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I apologize.
I'm surprised that's the first no pun we've really done this this entire stream.
None of the women in here have said no. I mean, my goodness.
Wow. It had to be put somewhere. No leaves, and the guards at that point rough Bond up, and they throw him in a cell. I'm going to let you talk about the escape.
It's a little frustrating watching action films these days because everything goes right, or if it doesn't, they've got the backup plan and then that goes right. But really, Bond's roughed up and he's locked up. Just put a bullet through his head. I mean, that's the only thing as an adult when you see a lot of these films that, as a kid when you're young, and when I saw this the first couple of times, okay, maybe because there wasn't a lot of killing in the movie necessarily like this that you'd think it would be okay. But I liked how Bond was able to escape. It makes sense, I guess. Is it convenient? Yes. Do I like it? Not necessarily, but I don't hate it. It's just, you start to see things in films that when you start thinking about it, you go, okay, is this something that came out later? Like, for example, we talk about radioactivity. We talked about how Dr. No lost the use of his hands. And, you make it go, well, wait a minute. If I was fast forwarding, say, 10 years in the future in the early 70s when martial arts got to be a big deal, the bad guy in the one Bruce Lee film, he's got the spike on it. It's the one where they, is it Game of Death? Damn it, I'm drawing a blank here. It's where they go to the island and they're fighting, and John Saxon's in it, and the other guy that was in Black Belt Jones and all that too. It's like, are you kidding me? Did they rip off this guy for that? I don't know what the answer is to it, but I'm like, it really reminds me of it, except for Dr. No's got two of them, and in this one, he's only got one. It's Enter the Dragon, I think. Yeah. And I'm like, okay, I just don't get it, but okay, rip off Dr. No. There you go. No, but yeah, he gets to the scene here too. And, of course, there's a lot of operators going around that are oblivious to everything that's going on. Bond is obviously able to kind of go undercover, which, there's a vat of acid. He sees Dr. No doing his thing. And a lot of times in these Bond movies, I'm not going to lie to you, even though I love James Bond, the grand finale, I really don't care about. It's just too fantasy for me. Even with something like this, that's not necessarily a small film, but since it's the first Bond film, they hadn't gotten to the point where, you're going to have this elaborate thing at the end. I prefer something a little different. It just puts us into fantasy action rather than whatever. I'd rather see something less than this. It's better than a shootout that would become apparent, like say in GoldenEye and going forward, in at least in the Pierce Brosnan films. And for right now, I guess this is okay. But again, I will point this out: beautiful set piece here. You clearly see everything around the room. It's labeled. There's not a lot of confusing things, so you can tell where the action is going to be immediately. How do we say this? There's a not so great hand-to-hand fight where Dr. No ends up in the vat of acid.
I have to admit, I was laughing during this scene too. He gets up down there and he can't climb up because of his hands. And they're going against the metal ladder.
Give Dr. No a little love here if you're the writers. I mean, don't make him disposable, because then, I don't know, but he runs back into the place and he gets Honey Ryder, who was kind of tied up, and again, a bullet should have been put between her legs, or I'm sorry, her eyes, because she's put by this drain or whatever in a rather compromising position. But of course, they jump off the place as explosions are going off in the proverbial nick of time and get into a boat. And of course, Felix Leiter shows up in the proverbial nick of time, and she's looking really beautiful in her dress, and the wind is flowing and the sun's out and it's a brand new day, and Bond takes the rope and lets it go, and then
that was the part that was like, okay, there he is.
All right. No, I mean, it is what it is.
You get through the ending. I do agree.
That's what it is. Getting through it, tolerating it.
Especially with a lot of these, well, I guess some of the newer ones too, you would say. Some of the older ones, you have to just push through once they get to their final act. It's where they're trying to put all the action. And maybe less is more sometimes. They should have toned it down a little. They could have, but that doesn't change just how good this movie is, especially for it's the one that spawns a franchise. You get this fantastic character played by Sean Connery. You can't help but love it. Even though like we said, the final act, you push through. At that moment at the end where he's in the boat with Honey Ryder and they end up kissing, and he's just going to go ahead and let the rope go so that they can be alone. And Honey Ryder sees that. And Honey sees it, and she doesn't say anything, though. And the boat's just left behind, and that's how our movie ends. And it really is great.
Yeah, like I say, kind of some of the stuff we talked about at the beginning here, being Happy Father's Day to everybody out there. But James Bond to me was something that I have fond memories of watching it with my father growing up. And I really, upon watching it again, even though it's dated and some of the things aren't prevalent anymore, like with technology and all that, I can still, at my age, piece some things together and go, well, that seemed reasonable or not. I wonder how somebody, as I like to joke, your age of millennial, would look at a young film like or a film like this for the first time and go, well, wait a minute, I don't get what's going on here, or I don't understand why it took so long to do this. I can't imagine what it's like to watch a franchise that's this mature with this many films under its belt, good and bad, that we can do it. I don't know if as we get through the James Bond films, particularly the Connery ones, we usually like to talk about ranking them, and you get to where you go, well, I like this opening action sequence, this film, this woman's name, this scene, and that's one of the first franchises that for me as Bond you can really mark out for, because there's so many different eyes you can look at through. But generally my final thoughts is that I think it's a very solid film. It's very good. It's watchable. I'm a little sad, like I say, because the majority of films of the remaining Bond films are not just a simple spy caper that this one is. And I like that. I like a spy film. I don't want an action film. I don't mind action scenes or this or that. But the spy stuff just works so much better to me. And Connery's performance, it's just his personality. He suits it and he fits it. And that's when it gets interesting, where people argue about the pluses and minuses of other people that could have been Bond or ended up becoming Bond. You had two other guys later on, Timothy Dalton and Roger Moore, that were considered for it, but chose not to do it for their own reasons, being too young or doing other things. Connery just seemed to be the right man at the right time, and I think he's got a certain fondness in a lot of older people's hearts not just because he recently passed, but because the amount of work that he's done. He seems like a man's man, and I'm going to go back to the beginning. James Bond is nothing more than a male fantasy. It's something that we look at and in our way kind of go, we wish as a guy we could be him, because what's cooler than going around the world being smart and competent, good looking, well dressed, a hit with the ladies, making money at the poker table, having a sweet crib, not married, all those kind of juvenile things that when you're young you think's the epitome of being an adult, you fantasize in James Bond, and then here you get to see it. Does he overdo it? No. Does he seem like he has 100% command of the role? Not yet. But it's there immediately from the first scene, and some other scenes in here too. So I'm very pleased to know that Sean Connery's had a lasting impression on a lot of people, and people will argue it. Sometimes first is best, not always. I don't know if this is his best film, and we'll talk about that later. But yeah, what a solid outing for a spy film. And I think we'll talk about in the next couple of films here how once they finally find their footing on what a Bond film is going to be, generally speaking, at least at that point, it's when we're really going to be start talking about Bond. But yeah, love watching Bond films. This one has a high level of rewatchability for me. Most of them do, some of them don't, but definitely the earlier ones do. I think this is just a really, really good film. And if you're new to it, like Johnny has mentioned up there before, like I say, I think this is showing on Tubi here in the United States. Check it out. These usually float off and on different services or whatever, but you get yourself a nice, good copy of it too. It still looks good and it's real sharp. It's a wonderful introduction to it. And the other thing I would say to Johnny, and I'm sure Eric knows this as well in chat here, that if you start from the beginning with Bond and you see how things develop, there's such a wealth of experience from that alone that I think it gives you a better appreciation for some of the films, because even 5 or 10 films in, you still got like 10 to 15 more to go and compare it to. That's the fun of Bond. And when you're bouncing around to different films just because they're on, or different actors and stuff, or because certain channels have certain rights to certain Bond films and not the others, it's really kind of hard to kind of go back and see that and I think appreciate, well, you know, I always remember GoldenEye was a great video game and it was a great fun movie, and I'm not particularly fond of GoldenEye, and I like Pierce Brosnan, but if you started off with that and that's your template, then you go back and go, well, Sean Connery sucks, he's old and the movies are slow and dull and boring. Oh, that's where everybody argues and fight, and that's what makes even in 2021 here today talking about this, Bond such a great film to discuss there too. Yeah, so yeah, Backyard Moments is popping in too. I think I tagged him in there and all that. It says for more information, check him out. Yeah, for me, I think that there's a lot of sites out there too. I'm not personally familiar with any of them other than the few that I've looked at too, so I'm just trying to drum up some interest in it. But the passionate Bond fans are out there. They could talk about this all day. It's always great to have a fun little argument about what we like and don't like and what's good, and ranking and comparing it. It's that, like I say, juvenile thing as a man that we like to do. How much more fun is it than debating, oh, well, Bond is really cool in this or that, and we didn't even talk about gadgets because thankfully they really weren't in here. But yeah, like this film a lot, and there's a lot of Connery to still talk about. What's your final thoughts overall for this film?
That's a part of the really charm of this movie. It is what you said. It is a spy, I guess thriller would be the appropriate word. You have small tricks that he does, and that's how he works. And it's clever. It's quick, and you enjoy that engagement. We enjoy some of the action, yes, and some of it's unnecessary. But overall, these films are a trip, and we just are here for the ride.
Yeah. So anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. We could plan on probably trying to tackle these here in order, not sure of a schedule. We've been doing some other things lately too. Branch out a little bit of TV, even though we like to say we're an 80s based film channel. We do like to focus on action, particularly like the canon films and everything that you can think of that came out in the 80s. Even the B movie, C movie level schlock is there too. But for this film and just in general, it just, you know, it's a classic. I mean, you're talking Sean Connery here, but we've also been doing Twin Peaks lately, covering that. We're in the middle of season 2 right now, checking that out. We've been doing, we just got finished doing Kolchak actually too. We've gotten away from doing some horror films because we wanted to tackle Kolchak, a very impressionable show from the 70s as well too. So check some of those out, and anything else that you see coming up Tuesday night. We'll see you again, and we'll have something new for you then. Eric, you got to get ready for Commando, sir. I like your little comment here. If you're not Sean Connery, Roger Moore, then you ain't Bond.
And that's exactly what he meant.
I
Just
like
love.
Dalton. I mean, I do. I know a lot of people don't, but he had something with him too. And well, that's something, again, that's still so young that we haven't even had a chance to talk about. But when we get there, we will too. So thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for checking in. And as always, stay extreme. Have a good night, everybody. And just remember, as Nancy Reagan let us all know in the 80s, whenever in doubt, whenever you felt challenged, remember, just say no. Doctor, no. Good night.
Dr. Bye.
I should know.